Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Target Practice, a podcast about great managers, interesting decisions, and scaling companies. I'm Nir Gerson, CEO of Target Board AI. Today, I have with me Andrea Corey, who's a tech executive with multiple years managing startups and scale-ups, specifically specializing in platform engineering. Andrea, we've spoken a few times before the recording, and it's been great talking to you. Really excited to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fine. Andrea, you've scaled multiple companies and multiple teams. What would you say was your proudest achievement?
Yeah, I probably go back to the first product company that I worked at. It was called Eloqua. I started there with some past coworkers who founded this company, and I was employee number 3. And we built that, we scaled it, ultimately to IPO and acquisition by Oracle 12 years later. So that whole journey of employee number 3 to the end state just required me to probably take on a dozen different roles, sometimes several simultaneously, and really grow and change myself on an ongoing basis. So it was just a pretty wild ride. And, the first few years were probably much slower than the current startups because we didn't have a lot of funding and, the tooling and everything was very different. But, towards our scaling years, just really challenging to scale the business and scale the platform. And I learned a lot about technology, about managing people, and about myself in the process.
When you take such a long road in one company and go through all those changes as it grows, it allows you to grow as a person and as a professional. 12 years is a lot. During those 12 years, what would you say was like one moment where you said, wow, this was a massive challenge and we did so well?
Yeah, so we had an opportunity at one point where we were basically trying to take an existing customer who was Sybase at the time, and they had a few small departments trying us out, and we were in negotiations for a large enterprise deal with the entire organization. And we were a small company. We hadn't even done a Series A yet. So we were a small startup, and we were contemplating taking on this enterprise customer it was going to be multiple countries, multiple locations. We were going to have to train trainers. We were going to have to do all sorts of things technically on the platform to scale to meet their needs. And we kind of said to each other, well, we're either going to do this or we're going to go down, like the business would have failed if we didn't figure out a way to really monetize and to really get through that hurdle of a bunch of spot solutions and into a more robust enterprise scalability play, and especially because we needed the funding. So it was a bit of like well, if we don't try this, we're going to die. So we might as well die trying if we can't succeed. And, about 2 years later, 3 years later, we came out of it having taken on a number of enterprise customers. And each one was sort of like a bit bigger and a bit bigger and a bit bigger. And it was very challenging for my teams and for the customer facing teams to continually meet those challenges, but we really did it. And we came into a point where really the next challenge became, well, now we need to remake sort of our architecture and our user interface because we had gotten what we could out of the existing. So that was a bit of a function there of like, okay, we can do this. We can actually support enterprise customers. We can support these volumes.
That's amazing. So last week I was in the UAE and I pitched to all these huge companies that are bigger than any companies I've ever pitched to. So I met the CTO of Fab. So like this huge bank over there, and they liked it. So I absolutely get like the flexing beyond, your weight limit. That's the only way you grow.
Yeah, it really is the only way.
Okay. Now, what would you say was a situation where you could have done better?
Mm-hmm. I would say like there's probably several. First one I want to talk about is, I'm an engineer by training. I'm very logical. I'm very direct at times. And I would say sometimes that's held me back a bit where I needed to spend more time building relationships to get things done with a group of people versus kind of driving hard at the solution. Both are needed. And so it can smooth the path to really have those strong relationships when you're trying to do really hard things together. And so I think that's a thing that I have to kind of continuously remind myself of. And I definitely went through patches where I was like, well, I'm just going to like logic my way through this. you can't just do it that way beyond a smaller size, right? When you're leading functions or leading teams, when there's a lot of cross-functional collaboration. So that is like a generalized lesson that I've learned. Something more specific is, at one point I strayed a bit from my actual technical influence and my actual technical know-how. And I kind of regret that. I became more of like a manager of managers and just that. Managing metrics, yes. Managing operations, but being less involved and understanding less about the technical like know-how and where things were going. And I really did a big reset after that to go back and actually took on a role that was much more like 80% hands-on coding and 20% leading. Because I felt it was important to really immerse myself in technology again.
Do you feel it paid off?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was actually the second startup. So I went into a very hands-on role. I was excited about, trying something new again. The business problem was super interesting, and I really learned a lot about like platform engineering. More, I would say, at Eloqua, we were figuring things out as we were going. We were building SaaS before SaaS had any known architectures or tooling or anything. We built our own tooling. So the second startup was a bit more like, what would be an intentional architecture and what would be an intentional way we would build this as a platform? And that was a huge amount of like learning and understanding what works technically at scale, how to like what you can optimize for. Sadly, that startup wasn't successful. We worked at it for about 6 years and we ended up folding it. But a lot of learnings there about the business and the use cases and scaling that system.
And I think today with AI, that skill set or capability to sort of go back and be hands-on is even more important than ever before.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
I see a lot of executives that sort of start struggling with that now.
Yeah, indeed. I don't like contribute to our production code day to day, but I do look at a lot of code. I'm involved in our technical decision making. I talk to our engineers all the time, balancing the needs and figuring out where to optimize, where to put more investment. Like, what do we need to do to kind of shore up our technical capabilities is a huge focus of mine. Being very involved in the really shaping the technical roadmap for the platform teams and for the org as a whole.
Next question.
Mhm.
By the way, thanks for all the candid answers. I think it's really great.
Okay, great.
Did you encounter any situation where having the right data made a big impact on the decisions you had to make?
Yeah, I would say like there's a few things. One is pretty current to right now, which is the cost of AI. I think there's been a big shift over the past month or two where people are starting to realize that the costs are not going down. In fact, I've heard I went to a conference about a month ago and everything opened up with AI, the cost of AI are going up. What's everybody doing about it? Uh, I'm not trying to say that I predicted this, but I kind of had an understanding of some of the data center fundamentals. Like I used to build and run a system that was in a data center. I have some of the understanding of like power systems and this kind of stuff that goes into it. So for me, it was never a done deal that costs were going to go down. And I always sort of planned for costs to potentially go up in the back of my mind, meaning I always wanted to track and understand what the costs were and try and understand how they were adding value, where they were adding value. It wasn't that meaningful to track it until probably the last 6 months because the costs were fairly small. But as those more powerful models came onto the scene and as we saw people starting to really use them, right away we wanted to jump in and understand like, okay, where are we getting the best usage? Like, how is this correlating to our actual fundamental metrics of delivery and quality and uptime and so on and so forth? So for me, like that data piece is just like maybe not accepting some of the fanfare or hype or whatever that was going on, which was like, hey, don't worry about it, just burn all the tokens. Like for me, that was really never a point of view that I had.
It's a little bit like a drug economy, right? You need to get the next best, stronger thing, like, so to get the next high, and it's not necessarily doing anything good for your
Yeah.
budget or your health.
Yeah. Like one thing I heard recently, just over the weekend, I was listening to something, which is that there's probably going to be a constraint on even like just licensed electricians, because you can't produce a licensed electrician overnight. Like it takes years of apprenticeship and training, and you need licensed electricians to build data centers.
So back to the UAE trip, we met G42, and they're building like a 500 megawatt data center there, which essentially looks like a city. And they have this huge model in their office, and like the engineering offices inside that model, they essentially copied like the Ample campus, and that's like such a small piece of that city they're building, which is absolutely crazy. And endless amount of electricity and energy and water and so one thing they're most interested in right now is just resilience,
Hmm.
right? Like you're investing so much into this thing, which is a complicated system, like any complicated system, right? But it's also a target, and it becomes like a strategic infrastructure for the country. So how do you actually defend it from cyber or from missiles or from whatever?
Yes.
It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been amazing. Amazing experience to see.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it blew my mind. Unlike anything I've ever seen before at that scale. Okay. Now, what is a situation where you needed the data to make a decision or to understand the situation, but you couldn't get it or
Hmm.
couldn't get it in time?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say coming into Homebase where I currently work 3 years ago. So I just had my 3-year anniversary. The engineering org had recently scaled quite a bit, but there weren't a lot of metrics about the org in general. We didn't have basic uptime metrics. We didn't really have basic metrics about delivery, or what people were working on was very hard to even identify. And so it felt like, there were a number of things to do and a number of things to focus on, but it was very hard to, initially figure out, well, what is the best thing we could work on? What is the best opportunity? Because we had to kind of start fetching the data a little bit, producing the data in some cases. For example, actually, building out an incident management practice and understanding what the uptime was, and, just talking to a lot of people. And, as a new leader coming in, you're talking to a lot of different people and you're hearing conflicting stories sometimes, right? And that's not that people are, it's not that it's maybe that they only have a slice of the picture, right? So different engineers or different managers might have a different slice of the picture. And so you might be hearing different stories. And it's hard to know how to assemble that into something where, okay, we're going to focus on this, we're going to focus on that. These are our big things that can help us move forward when you don't have a lot to go on. And so it's really about trying to identify, what are the, there's small problems you can fix. What are the bigger problems, and how can we unlock maybe some improvements that span, the whole org versus like one team's particular problems that they're facing. So it was a bit of that. So, right away we started building some practices, like I mentioned, incident management. So we had a really good sense of how much time are we spending on incidents? What is our uptime? Those are for me important metrics to be able to lead the function, and a number of other incidents around just, yeah, especially like where were we spending our time roughly? How much effort was going into this business, this part of the business versus that part versus another part?
Did you find anything that was a surprise?
Many surprises. I mean, like an example was, we would hear from the exec team or from other leaders that, there's a real bottleneck in mobile. We don't have enough mobile developers. We're bottlenecked there. And while that was true, if you took just that at face value and didn't kind of look underneath it, right? You might be tempted to just hire a bunch of mobile engineers to solve the problem, right? But that was really just the surface problem, or how it was manifesting to outsiders. But there were a lot of different problems under the hood where we were repeatedly solving the same problems. We didn't have a proper platform organization. So again, being somebody with a lot of platform engineering experience, started to really invest in a set of platform teams that owned a set of functions so that we could repeatedly, solve problems consistently and repeatedly, and not having repeated one-off, in-team solutions, right? So if we've got 5 different teams and they're all trying to solve the same sort of problem that one platform team could solve, that's obviously, potentially a better investment, or a better approach to make.
Amazing. So getting the right data influence actual org changes.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
that's right. And I kind of knew this coming in. It was a little bit obvious that we needed the platform investment. I was kind of hired to do that, but also it was really helpful to think about that intentionally, which were the parts that we needed to work on the most. I would say like there was one decision that was probably premature, which was to implement a third party for authorization. And really, if we had better understood the state of some of the systems, I would say as the new leaders coming in, I would say we possibly would have paused that for even just a few months to clean up some of the underlying architecture in order to make it much easier to implement this third party and to fit it into our system. Because we've got a web app, we've got a number of different mobile applications, we've got integrations with point of sale systems. So we've got a lot of authentication points, and we probably could have done a better job to do some refactoring first and save ourselves time overall.
It's like a situation where you came in, you saw a smoking gun, or like a critical thing where you said, oh my God, we have to fix this. And it sort of creates like tunnel vision, but essentially behind that, there were even higher priority things to fix.
Yeah, and it's a bit of like, well, it was a critical thing to fix, but how do we get there in the best and most productive way possible? Was maybe like not jumping right in to do it, was to first take the time to figure out, yeah, basically doing a bit of re-architecture before factoring it in, and it would have been much easier and quicker to actually then build it into the system.
That's a
That's
great point.
something upon reflection, and guess what? There were a few engineers who tried to tell us this.
It's nice. Okay. Last question for today. I know you love metrics.
Mhm.
Which are your favorites?
My favorites. Yeah. I love understanding uptime and incidents. Like I've mentioned it maybe 3 times on this call already, because it tells us so much about how stable we are at getting things out the door, right? And so this presumes that you're shipping a lot of software. So let's just say, assuming you're shipping a lot of software, I really like to understand the frequency of issues, especially time to discover, how quickly you discover them, time to resolve, how quickly you can resolve them. It really spans a lot of like specialties. It spans observability and monitoring. It spans operational facets around, do you have a strong incident team that's trained? Do you have proper cascading down to the right people? So it's a real function of people, of observability, of ability to understand and reckon with your systems quickly, identify the problems and fix them. And it's crucial for customer trust. It's crucial that our systems are providing the right kind of quality and uptime that customers need given the use case. So to me, it's a very important like customer metric at the end of the day. Whether they ask for it or not, they might not ask for it because maybe they're not sophisticated technologists saying, I want to know what your time to discovery is, right? But they're going to ask for it one way or another. They're going to say this is flaky, or this doesn't work when I need it to work.
Andrea, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. That's it for today's episode of Target Practice. If you enjoyed, please rate and review, and I hope to see you next time.